Welcome back to our study of blood vessels, and in this video we are going to learn about the systemic circulation. So both the arterial and venous side. And so by the time you are done with this anatomy course and in lab, you'll know the names of all those blood vessels that you see here on these diagrams. So let's start first. So I'm not going to talk names of every specific blood vessel because learning the names, that's a lab activity, but I am going to talk a little bit about some of the structures and just point out some things that you may have missed. So when we're talking about the arterial blood flow going to the brain, I want you to realize that we have 4 blood vessels that contribute to our cerebral circulation. Coming up the neck on both sides, we have a vertebral artery, which fuses that form the basilar artery that sits over just underneath the pons. And then more anterior, we have a right and a left internal carotid artery as well. And so all 4 of these blood vessels are dumping blood into this circular structure known as the circle of Willis, or the cerebral arterial circle. And this is one of those places in the body where we have an anastomosis as opposed to end arteries. And so that's really good for your brain circulation. Now, the venous drainage inside the skull for the brain is also different than other parts of your body, in that if you recall, the venous drainage occurs between the 2 layers of the dura and those dural sinuses. So the mid-sagittal line where you had your sagittal sinuses, and eventually all of that venous blood will drain through the jugular foramen and into the internal jugular veins. In the thoracic area, coming out of the heart, we have the ascending aorta, which has 2 blood vessels very close to the heart, which are going to send blood back to the heart muscle itself. Then in the arch of the aorta, we have the 3 main blood vessels, which are the branches responsible for all the blood that goes to our head and our upper extremities. Once we are past the arch, we are descending. In the chest, we have the thoracic aorta, and then below the diaphragm, it would be the abdominal aorta. So coming off the thoracic aorta, on each side, we have 12 blood vessels. So we have 12 pairs of blood vessels, which are going to the intercostal muscles between the ribs. And so the arteries travel with the veins as well as the companion nerve, and they all sit in that little groove on the inferior surface of the rib, on the deep surface, in that costal groove you learned about in lab. Now, the carotid arteries, the external carotid arteries bring blood to the outside of the head, and then they branch, and we have branches that do our entire head. And similarly, we would have veins draining that area, and that would drain into your jugular veins. And so the lateral views are labeled for you, and if you want, here is an anterior view where you can practice doing your own labeling. I do want to talk about the carotid arteries and the arch of the aorta in more detail because there are some unique characteristics to them. In our carotid arteries, we have 2 sense organs. The first one is called the carotid sinus. Now, this is not a venous sinus. I don't know why it's called the carotid sinus, but it's called the carotid sinus. And basically, this is the wall of the internal carotid artery just at the area of the bifurcation. It bulges out a bit. And what happens is in the wall, we have a lot of sensory receptors linked to the glossopharyngeal nerve, and they are monitoring the blood pressure that is going into your brain and sending those messages to your brain so your brain can, the central baroreceptors can respond to that. Now, outside the external internal carotid artery, but at the bifurcation, there is something known as the carotid body. And this is a chemoreceptor. So it's not looking at blood pressure, it's a chemoreceptor. And it's mostly looking for drops in oxygen, but it also monitors a few other things as well. And this also sends information via the glossopharyngeal nerve, because these are up here by the angle of your jaw. So don't be massaging here, because if you're massaging, then you're changing the pressure in your carotid sinus, and you can cause some severe arrhythmias and blood pressure changes. So don't be massaging and trying to feel for these things. Now, similar to the carotid artery, the aortic arch has some sense organs, and there's two of them here as well. The aortic bodies are chemoreceptors, and they are right near where we're going to have the brachiocephalic trunk and the left common carotid and the left subclavian arteries come off of them. And so these are not doing any monitoring of oxygen levels. They're monitoring your blood pH and the carbon dioxide levels. And if you remember that equation where carbon dioxide meets with water and eventually dissociates to hydrogen ions, that affects the pH. And so this is really monitoring that pH and messages. Because this is down in the chest, it can no longer be glossopharyngeal nerve. Remember, everything below the shoulders is going to be related to the vagus nerve. So that's what's doing this. And then there is a baroreceptor related to the aortic arch, and it doesn't have a name. It feels like the poor cousin without a name or something. And it is located in the ascending aorta and the aortic arch. These are the baroreceptors over here, and they are also monitored by the vagus nerve. Okay, so on this slide, I have put baroreceptors on one side and chemoreceptors on the other side. So take a minute, stop the video, and make sure you understand which names go with the baroreceptors and which names go with the chemoreceptors. Okay, so coming off the arch of the aorta, we're going to have the subclavian arteries, which then bring all the blood to your upper extremities, and all the blood will eventually be drained by subclavian veins. So following the aorta below the diaphragm, we have the abdominal aorta, and it has a bunch of branches which are going to go to all the abdominal and pelvic viscera, including things like your kidneys and your spleens and your gonads and your stomach and liver and small intestine and large intestine. But I do want to talk about something special that occurs here in the abdomen, and that is the hepatic portal system. So this is a venous system that is a portal system. It's one of two portal systems that we have in our body, and we're going to learn about the other one when we do the endocrine system. And so what a portal system is when we have venous blood that was drained from an organ, and instead of that vein taking the blood back towards the heart like it does everywhere else, that venous blood actually goes to another organ first. So in this case, what is happening is the venous blood that is draining your gastrointestinal tract, your digestive system. So it's draining, not only does it have the nutrients from the food you eat, it may also contain some toxins from some things you may have consumed that are not good for you. And so instead of sending that possibly toxic blood directly back to the heart, it sends it first to the liver. So this is nutrient-rich blood, but it is oxygen poor and may contain toxins. So here we have the artery going to the intestine. We have a capillary bed in our intestine where we have absorbed all the nutrients as well as possible toxins. That we have the veins draining the intestine. We go into the hepatic portal vein, and that then takes us to the liver, where the liver is going to detoxify, and then we will have a vein exit the liver, which then carries that venous blood directly back to the heart through the inferior vena cava. And then the last thing is the aorta branches into two branches. And so we can get blood flow going down to our lower limb vessels through some femoral arteries, and then can drain from our lower limbs through femoral veins. And that's it for our exploration of the systemic circulation. And I will see you again soon. And thank you for all your hard work in this class. It is really appreciated.